Hi. Yeah, for the next question, I'd like to start this one with Megan, if you don't mind. We've been talking a lot about the impacts of COVID-19 and trying to create cultures of inclusion as we work in this hybrid, diverse way where we're remote, we're in person, we're on platforms such as the one we're on right now. How do we work this way while supporting people's mental health and well-being? I think that's something that comes up a lot when we talk about how technology is impacting us day in
Yeah,
and day out.
so besides being an evangelist at Microsoft, I'm also the co-lead of employees with mental health conditions. And so I have an anxiety disorder as well as fibromyalgia, which is a chronic pain condition. You may see me kind of moving in my chair because it's hard to sit entirely still for a long period of time. But I think going back to what Aza said, when I really look back over the last 10 months and I think, what has this global pandemic taught me about inclusion? It's that we want to belong to something bigger than ourselves. And community is more important than ever, whether it's our family and friend community, potentially our religious communities, but certainly our work communities where we do spend a lot of time. And technology is playing a more important role than ever in helping us stay connected. It is part of the reason that so many of us have the luxury, honestly, to be working from home. But if that technology can't reflect the human diversity and allow us to communicate in ways that is expressive of who we are, then we need to be thinking about that. And so, the bottom line is that we see mental health conditions rising very steeply. Over 2 in 5 people report having a mental health condition. Screening for things like anxiety are up 600%. Depression is up 800%. And we know that technology has a dual role to play. I would never suggest that this constant idea that we should be connected at all times is good for our mental health. In fact, we have to disconnect to recharge, and that has to be incredibly intentional. In fact, this is a statistic that always blows my mind, but 30% of people check their inbox before they ever get out of bed. It's like wake up, roll over, phone in the face, right? And so part of what I, am really proud to see Microsoft doing is building in what I call apps as wellness advocates, which is how do we help use AI to go in and say, find me that focus time so that I can get things done. Turn off notifications because it takes 23 minutes to refocus after checking just one email or chat. And when you have those notifications coming in all of the time, you cannot get the focus that you need. And doing things like automatically scheduling breaks so that you can stand up, and even thinking about the way that we begin to understand our own behavior. So one of my tools that I use is my analytics, where I get a purple square when I do not go back online in the evening. And you can set your own schedule, so don't worry about that. But again, it's allowing us to begin to understand our behavior, keep ourselves honest, build what I call good mental health hygiene with technology, as so many of us spend so much time online these days.
Thanks so much, Megan. I find that really helpful, and I know I'm using some of those tools as well. It's become more important than ever, and I think a lot of us are making a concerted effort because we've all heard the statistic about how many people wake up first thing and look at their device, and I think many of us are taking that concerted effort to wait a few minutes before we let the world in and give ourselves some time to reset for the day. Maybe what I'll do is I'll get Andre to do a follow-up on that and then kick it over to you, Aza. Andre?
Yeah, I'll be brief because I thought Megan's answer was outstanding. I think, as we look at how to be more inclusive, one is certainly, again, I mentioned the company culture, right? What are we doing to make sure that we're being more inclusive, setting goals around diversity, using collaborative platforms? One of the things, I think the Teams and Zoom fatigue is real. If you're on video, I recently had a conference call where participation video was off and the participation was much lower than when video is on. So we are actually on as people when video is on, and we feel like we have to be much more engaged. That can actually consume energy. And when you think about what we've done in terms of replacing commute times with, I think, stop me if you haven't put more work in, right? As a result of, where you were commuting before, now you're online longer and you're engaged more. So we just have to be conscious of those things and provide means to be able, outlets for our employees and our customers, our partners, to be able to be more conscious of it, so that we can make some of those behavioral changes and use tools like Megan outlined to be able to not be so online and let the world in.
Thanks.
One of my this is a very small, like, personal hack, but I still find it very helpful, is that I don't charge my phone all the way every night. It sort of like ends at like 60%, 70%, is what I charge it to. And that means that I don't have to use my own willpower to not use my phone. Because if it's my willpower versus, supercomputers pointed at my brain and trillion-dollar industries like figuring out how to hack my conscience to get me to like scroll a little bit more, I'm going to lose. It's not about sort of designing a better relationship. It's sort of like staring down a cigarette, but like being forced to puff every like, a couple of minutes, and then being like, okay, now you have to stop. It's just, it doesn't work. And so if I can find a way of outsourcing that willpower, it works much better. Yeah, I'll stop there.
I would suggest, I don't know if I'm on right now or not, but these are all fantastic ideas, and I'm glad to see that some things are being built in by the companies. As someone that doesn't know all those things are going on, I will say that having watched The Social Dilemma was really I sort of knew all that was happening, but needed to be told. And my only saving grace is that I'm a forgetful person, and I live in a townhouse, and our bedroom is on the top, and I always forget my phone on a different floor, and I don't get out of bed to get it. So that's my forgetfulness is actually helping me, I think, in this battle.
That's awesome.
Thank you. I don't know if that can be taught. But, Emily, did you want me to skip ahead to another question, or did you have a follow-up?
No, you go ahead.
And again, I would just encourage people that we do have a couple minutes left if you want to get a couple of questions in on the chat function. This question, I guess, again, could start with Andre and Megan for in Toronto, but we've talked about the different issues that we're facing, but I would like to get our perspective now on how industry, and because we have a lot of public sector people in on the conversation today, how industry and governments are actually performing now when it comes to accountability for the problems that we're facing in AI. And obviously, we'd like to focus on Canada if we could, but we could go internationally as well. Megan, would you like to take a first stab at this, maybe?
One of the things that I think is incredibly important, which is it's hard to be more accessible if you don't know how accessible you are today. Right? And so that concept of actually understanding, any government entity understanding, how are you using technology? How are you using AI? Is it being used in the ways that you want to? And so that's one of the reasons we actually developed in collaboration with G3 ICT, which is a global nonprofit started by the UN, on this smart city, accessibility smart city maturity model, which is a way for a city to actually begin to examine itself and say, well, how are we using technology? Is it inclusive of the communities that we want it to be? Are we reaching people? Because we still know that large swaths of communities actually don't have access to technology, which is that digital divide, which is the other piece, which is if a government goes completely online, how do people without technology begin to interface with the citizen services? So, to me, I think it's really about taking a look at yourself and being thoughtful about where you're at and where you want to go and what maturity really means to you. And again, I think that is an exercise which brings together stakeholders from across any public sector community, which starts a conversation. Are we doing everything as perfectly as we want to? No, this is a journey. That's why we're here having this conversation. But it is through the act of bringing together stakeholders, including the community, including the disability community, to think about evaluation and that path forward.
Thanks, Megan. Andre?
I think the element of accountability is, we talked a little bit about data and data sets and making sure that to me, it's the right information in the right place with the right governance and checks and balances provided by a sort of an ethical and culturally diverse and inclusive organization. And so a lot of things that we're doing at Dell, it's technology is what we do. It's what we help our partners and customers with. And so I'm going to sort of pivot the question more on the accountability and the delivery piece of it, which is making sure that the data is secure, making sure that the right information. I mean, all these data lakes gather all this information, but you don't know what that 1% that's needed in order to make the right decision, the ethical decision, the correct decision in providing a service. And so access to information has to be secure. Getting the availability of that information has to be in the right place. And some of those are elements of that are focus. We always start with the business outcome. What is the government entity or the public service trying to provide? What are they trying to accomplish? It could be patient care, and it could be delivering, patient records in a remote area, working with an air ambulance. And so availability, uptime, patient records, and then securing all of that information are all parts of what we would look at end to end in that type of an example.
And Aza, maybe you can speak to. We know you're not in Canada right now, but how is Canada doing in the international rankings with our issues here?
I'll put it this way: I'd much rather live in Canada than I would live in the U.S. right now. It would be, if you guys have any extra spots, let me know. I guess one of the things I do want to talk about, though, with accountability, transparency, right to recourse, is these large-scale AI systems are pernicious. And it's not like these are abstract threats that are coming. They are already here. When a surveillance and AI system is accurate, it's Orwellian. And when it's inaccurate, it's Kafkaesque, right? Here in the US, YouTube, even though, after we've sort of raised the alarm and they stopped recommending flat earth conspiracy videos, which they had recommended hundreds of millions to a billion plus times, they fixed that problem. They still recommended the voting hoax and fraud videos, also hundreds of millions of times. And the US and the world is sort of living in a AI tinged world where these recommendation systems have sort of put outrage glasses on all of us, so that we see, sort of talking about this in the presentation, we see the very worst of the opposite sides. It's imagine, right, like you put on a pair of outrage glasses and all you saw at home is where your kids had destroyed a room, or where your partner left the toilet seat up, or where there's the milk isn't actually finished, or already got finished in your refrigerator and it's just there at the very ends and dregs. You just saw all the things that made you the most angry about the people you're living with. That's sort of the way those outrage glasses are sort of the way that social media has made us all look at each other. And are the companies that are creating these large-scale digital habitats sort of imbued with AI held accountable? How do you hold somebody accountable for the effects that we've been living under for the last 10 years? How do you know when you deploy these large-scale systems that they're not doing this kind of irreparable damage to the substrate of our social fabric? And so I think, data privacy, deeply important. Understanding before you deploy, deeply important. But having companies have responsibility for the way that their systems impact individuals, relationships, communities, and societies is going to take more than we've currently done.
That's a phenomenal answer, Aza. Thank you so much, and Megan and Andre as well. I think it's an important point just to be able to see all of us as whole humans and not see just the very worst thing about the people that we disagree about or disagree with. We're getting close to time, unfortunately, and we did get a couple of questions from the audience, so I'm going to integrate them into this wrap-up question to each of you. So just to kind of wrap things up, we'd love it if each of you could share your personal perspectives on how technology can be a force for good in the world. And, question from the audience, what are you guys doing to take vacation right now? I know a lot of not only my clients, but our teams, many of them haven't taken a day off since March, and it's starting to wear on us. So how are you guys cutting loose a little bit? If you could share that on your closing comments, and maybe we'll start with Megan and then go to Aza and Andre.
It's incredibly true. So I personally, as a person with a mental health condition, but I think this is reflective of larger society, is that I noticed that I have, I hit that emotional exhaustion and those feelings of burnout just more often. And so that idea of taking 2 big vacations a year is no longer sort of the way that I am building boundaries and helping myself recharge. Instead, I'm taking longer weekends more frequently. And I think that's just a function of the way that we are working. And I think part of what, we all do need to do is what works for you. Find what works for you and communicate that. I am a person that loves to have the camera on because I want to see your expression. I want to see Aza, shake his head. I know he's with me. I can see Andre smiling. Those are cues that are critical for me. And so, even something as simple as having your camera on can make a huge difference in everybody's lives. And so, where do I see technology being used for good? I mean, honestly, there are so many places where I do see a technology being used to really be that force multiplier to begin to think of a new future. And specifically with disability, if we think about mental health, the technology sector has exploded. And so all of a sudden now we have the ability to, again, lean in and maybe connect with a therapist, over telehealth medicine. We have the ability to build in things like meditation right into our workday, so that now we're integrating the behaviors that really engage in self-care. So those are just some personal ways for me that I see technology making a big difference in my own personal life.
Thanks, Megan. That's great.
Yeah.
Aza.
Love that, Megan. I think to answer that question, we have to return to what is technology even for? Why do we make it? I think we need to take a slightly broader view of technology than just electronic technology. I think of a paintbrush as a kind of human technology. A cello is a kind of human technology. Language even is a kind of human technology. And these kinds of technologies can enhance the things about us humans that are already most brilliant. And when I think about what is the promise of what technology could do for us, if we could trust it, it could be, our greatest sidekick. Help us know who are the right people for us to be meeting. What is the next piece of knowledge that increases our wisdom? How can we move up that developmental psychology sort of spiral? Technology could be helping do that, but only if we trust it, because it needs to have an asymmetric amount of knowledge about us in order to help, right? Just like a doctor or a therapist or a lawyer has to know things about you that can deeply damage you in order for them to do their work that helps you. So if you can have a fiduciary relationship, that is a trusted relationship where you know that technology is acting on your behalf, I think we can get to an incredibly beautiful world. One place that I see hope is I think of AI as the kind of microscope, telescope of our era, right, of our generation. It lets us see at both much greater specificity and also much larger scope than we've ever seen before. And I think like the telescope, which let us look at the patterns of the universe and discover that Earth is not the center of the universe. I think these technologies are going to let us look at the patterns of the universe and discover that humanity is not at the center. And one of my projects, I do the Center for Humane Technology. I also work on a project called the Earth Species Project, which is using sort of the latest in unsupervised machine translation, AI, to translate animal communication, that is, decode non-human language, and give us the ability to have the superpower of listening and to understand that we as human beings maybe aren't as special as we think, or another way of saying it is that the rest of the world is much more magical than we think. And technology could be helping us attune our empathy and listening if we chose a different business model. And on the what am I doing around burnout? It's a hard one because being stuck at home, I went a little manic and started working on a side project, which turned into like a third nonprofit with some incredible, brilliant people, and that's called Makespace, which is exactly meant to solve these kinds of problems we're interacting now, where Zoom fatigue and things like that. But I have found that the longed for time of COVID, the ability, instead of being out with many people, to go very deep with few people, have a small pod where we get together consistently, has been transformative for my own mental health.
Thank you for those insights, Andre.
Well, I think, today we talked a lot about behavior. And if I can think about, the first part of that question, about using usage for good, I would go back and tell a little bit of a story about my kids who have Friedreich's ataxia, and today they're in wheelchairs, but a couple of years ago in grade 10, they were still able to jog and participate. And they were going to phys ed class one time, and Ethan and Kyle were, always, because of their lack of coordination, were always the last picked on the team. And that day in phys ed, it was an ultimate frisbee. And it took the actions of one person, one phys ed teacher, who decided he's going to change the rules of ultimate frisbee. And he made it so that if Ethan or Kyle, they were each on one team, if they touched that frisbee, it would be an automatic touchdown. And as a result of that rule change, that one rule change, Ethan and Kyle went from being the last picked, least included, the least strategic players, the least defended players, to the most included, first pick, most strategic players, with one rule change. Not only that, they were included afterwards in all the social interactions that came out of that sport. Of course, there's an alarm here just as soon as that happens. But I would leave you with this notion. It's one rule change. That's all we need to look for. In the implementation of technology, if we can do one rule change that would change things, what would that rule change be?
Thank you so much for that, Andre. It's a phenomenal story, and I think it really does. It's a perfect way to describe how technology can be a force for good in the world, if we use it to be a force for good in the world. I want to thank each of you panelists for this phenomenal conversation. It's been great to spend a little bit of time with each of you. I highly recommend people check out Aza's work. And specifically the podcast, The Undivided Attention. I've been really enjoying that over the last several weeks as we've been planning for today's event. So thank you for that. And there's a lot of great resources on the Center for Humane Technology website, including for policymakers. So definitely, please do check that out. Megan and Andre, Microsoft and Dell, thank you so much for your sponsorship of this worthwhile event. And Steve Patterson, great job. Thank you for adding some levity to the conversation. I know it doesn't seem like it's going to be a fun conversation, but I actually find this quite fun. And before we kind of wrap this up, I just wanted to let everybody know that the booths are open. I hope you go and engage with our partners. They've put a lot of effort into making sure you know what their latest innovations are. They have some phenomenal promo gear in their booths if you're, clicking and engaging with them, that will get sent out to everybody. And with that, I will hand it back to Steve to wrap up.